Hi, everyone. So you did all the right things. You went to school, you got your degrees, you went on to corporate America or became a lawyer or a doctor, whatever career choice was approved for you. You got married, you joined all the right organizations, you had all the right number of kids to keep up with expectations. You look great on paper, and you're still miserable. Hi, I'm Elle. I'm a coach and I help successful women create lives that feel as good as they look. I feel like I'm yelling right now because as soon as I sat down to have this conversation with you, they started doing yard work outside. So I don't know if you can hear it, but hopefully, hopefully my screaming is loud enough to overcome the whatever's happening outside. So thank you for joining me. I'm very happy that you're here. This is such an important conversation. I think so many of us, particularly women who have been socialized, that we are the ones. I'll speak for myself. My mother was a boomer. I was raised by talented 10th boomer generation mother who came from talented 10th parents, who came from talented 10th grandparents. So I was raised by the expectation that college was not an option. College was what I was supposed to do. It was what everyone in my family and everyone I grew up with did. My mother and my father both had bachelor's bachelor's and master's degrees. Both of my maternal grandparents also have bachelor's and master's degrees. And both of my maternal great grandparents have bachelor's and master's degrees. My great grandfather was born 2 years after enslavement ended and had two bachelor's degrees and two master's degrees. One of his masters was from Cornell University. My family is from rural Texas, rural Louisiana, rural Alabama, very rural South. And so any education was always recognized and praised and elevated in my family as the way out, right? The way to freedom, the way to leverage, the way to social access. And for the most part, that worked, right? And so here I am, fourth generation college graduate. And at this present moment in 2025, I have a cousin, a third, fourth cousin at Morehouse, who is fifth generation college graduate and fourth generation Morehouse graduate. Morehouse man, right? He will be a Morehouse graduate when he graduates. So my family don't play about education. I went to Spelman, right? I was very much raised in this idea that there is a certain path that's set out for you, a certain path that you follow, and this is what you do in order to be successful. And I recognize and really appreciate where that philosophy is coming from. As I said, my great grandfather was, talented tith down. Education was the way. Formal education was the way. He not only had all of these degrees, and my great grandmother had these degrees, and my grandparents, as I said, all the way down the line had these degrees, but my great grandfather also started a school for, at the time we were called colored children, in Northeast Texas when there was no other school to educate Black children, because his whole mission in life was to educate Black children so that we could have a fighting chance, right, in this society. So, you know, I could go down the list of all of this kind of way that I was groomed and raised, this pedigree that raised me, right? Jack and Jill down. Grew up skiing, like all these things, grew up skiing, right? Like all these things that my family, with the best of intentions, did to prepare me to be able to be competitive in the market, right? To continue building on the legacy that they had created for me. So I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but welcome, because I want to tell you that while in many ways that worked for me, in many ways that served me, right? I'm not spitting in the face of my elders or my ancestors, because I would not be who I am or where I am in my life without them. In a lot of ways, that same talented 10th Black excellence mentality and way of being in the world was also harmful, because it is a very narrow path of what's acceptable, what's approvable, what's validated, what's respected. And I don't like following other people's blueprints. So if this resonates with you, feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you part of this community in this conversation because I help successful women create lives that feel as good as they look. And so many of us have been so deeply ingrained that the looking part is the most important part, right? The looking good on paper, looking good to other people, looking good to our peers, looking good to who we grew up with, looking good to our colleagues. And that forces this disconnect from what actually feels good to us, what actually resonates with us, what actually lights us up and turns us on. Truthfully, that path of following what turns you on and what lights you up is a lot harder because it's a lot less celebrated and a lot less supported. So I went to, I'm born and raised in Seattle, Washington. Everybody I grew up with was on the college track, right? Almost everybody I grew up with was on the college track. We were at, very bougie private schools and did all the things. And our parents had gone to college and some of their grandparents had gone to college. I may be one of the few who had that many generations of college graduates in my family, but nonetheless, all of the Black people that I grew up with, and I grew up with in a Black community in Seattle. Yes, they existed. Gentrification has devoured that. I can put a video right here to talk about that if you're curious about the details. But everybody I grew up with was on the college track, right? It didn't occur to me that I did not have an option to go to college. It was not something I even considered because that was never part of the conversation. It was like, we're doing all of this work. We've made all of this sacrifice. We've paved the way for you in this way so that you can go to college, so that you can continue this upward mobility. And again, I'm no tea, no shade, no pink lemonade. I appreciate everything my ancestors and elders have done for me. And there was no conversation about the impact that has on the psyche and the soul if you're trying to conform and whittle down and fit in and follow someone else's path, and how much you lose yourself, which is why so many of us end up miserable, end up disconnected, end up disempowered. After my first year at Spelman, I I was miserable. I did not want to be there. I was learning about world cultures, learning about the people of the world, doing all these things. And I was like, I want to be in the world. I want to be traveling. I want to be experiencing people and culture, boots on the ground, right? I don't want to be sitting in a classroom in a desk learning about them. I want to be on the ground. So I went back to my mom and I said, when I went home to that summer, right, from Atlanta to Seattle, I was like, Ma, I want to take a year off from college. Now, I didn't know nobody who had taken a year off. I didn't know anybody who had done the things I said I wanted to do, which was travel. But I am very strong-willed. And I was like, I want to take a year off and travel. And my mom literally said to me, I don't know what that means. We don't do that in this family, which is fair, right? Like, she didn't know what it meant. We didn't do that in this family. So me being 19 at the time, I was like, obedient, and went back to college, went back to Spelman, and was miserable, miserable. I did not want to be there. And this was the first time in my life that I can track back and remember when I stopped listening to myself and started doing what was expected of me, right? Because I was so caught up in the momentum between high school and college that even though I was like, oh, I would love to travel, I was in the momentum. Everybody I knew was going to college. My boyfriend at the time was going to Morehouse. I was going to Spelman. Like I knew a lot of people who were down at Morehouse and Spelman already. I knew people at Clark. So like we were just all in the momentum. There was no alternative. And so by the time I took a break and took a pause, and so much caught up with me, the momentum, but also kind of coming out of a lot of trauma in my house and coming out of a lot of like intensity in my house, that I could just like finally exhale. And I was like, wait, I don't want to be here. So by the time my sophomore year came around, my grades were lower than they'd ever been. I was completely, literally depressed, completely unmotivated, and went to the school counselor because I was like, I don't want to be here. This isn't my thing, but I'm also feeling depressed and I can't get out of bed. And the school counselor said, you're acting like a spoiled child who isn't getting what she wants. Now, as a grown up now, maybe I was. But as a 19-year-old who was like, I'm depressed, I can't get out of bed, that was not the right thing to say to me, right? It wasn't helpful for my mental health. And but it was reinscribing this idea of Black excellence, right? Of like, you go get your degree, you go to corporate America, you get married, you join all the right organizations, you have the perfect amount of kids, you get the right amount of money in your bank account, you work a lot, you save your money. Joy is not on the conversation. Fulfillment is not part of the conversation, right? Like what you are doing is ticking off the boxes, and then maybe on the weekend, maybe when you have a vacation, maybe when you retire, then we can figure out what you want to do to take a load off, right? That's the initial, I mean, that's the essential conversation of Black excellence, right? Or any kind of excellence, because I have had clients who are not necessarily Black, but maybe they're first generation Americans. Maybe they just have this social expectation because they're the first who've gone to college. They're the first out the hood. They're the first whatever. And they have this, all of this weight and this expectations on their shoulders. This is why I have my one-on-one offering. It's called Success Reset, which I'm obsessed with. I love it because it is a one-on-one private mentorship where I help successful women redefine success for themselves and reclaim ease. Because so much of our conversation and relationship to success is separate from ease, right? It's like success means all these things on the tick on the check box, right? All these things I have to do. Ease can wait. And so what comes in the place of our how to do that is often self-sacrifice, suffering, struggle, right? Why do you think this idea of the struggle is real is so conversational? So we're so used to saying it because we're like, I'm willing to suffer, I'm willing to sacrifice, I'm willing to struggle for this idea of success. But success, from my definition, feels good along the way. And so I had to learn that in my sophomore year when I went back after that Great Depression, didn't get the mental health support that I needed when I went to get it from the school counselor, was barely functioning. And I told my mother, I don't, let's have a tete-a-tete. And I said, I don't actually care what we do in this family. I'm taking a year off. And I did. I filled out my paperwork, submitted it to Spelman, got a leave of absence, and went home and worked at the MAC makeup counter at Nordstrom, saved all my money, and went to travel around the world for the first time. Now, the way that I knew that I was following my heart, right? I knew I was following my path, my calling. What was here for me to do was to take time off from school and do what I felt like doing for myself. I saved my own money and did it. No one was, I didn't, and what I ended up doing was I went to Nepal. Well, first I went to Thailand. Then I went to Nepal and I trekked in the Himalayas. I survived an avalanche. I turned 21 in India. I was in India for 5 weeks by myself, didn't know anybody. Then I went to France, and then my mom met me in France for a week or two of the trip. And then I traveled throughout France by myself for the rest of the time. I didn't have the language of like, Black excellence. I mean, it was ingrained, right? But I didn't have this idea of like, I'm doing my own thing, I'm rebelling. I just knew that I had to do what I wanted to do for myself because I knew what not doing what I wanted to do felt like, right? I knew that following what these expectations were, what these social norms were, how that let me feel because I wasn't honoring what I needed for myself. And so my life now is about trusting myself enough to follow my own calling and my own desires and my own dreams. The challenge is a lot of people aren't doing that. So it can be very lonely. It can be very isolating. It can be very singular because most people that I grew up with, that I went to college with, that I know from adulthood are not following their dreams. They're following the program. They're following the plan. And they look chef's kiss, amazing on paper, right? Amazing on paper. Most of the people I grew up with from childhood, middle school, high school, college, and then not even in college yet, just people, the Black people I grew up with are college professors with PhDs, have MBAs, have JDs and are lawyers, are corporate American consultants are high on the hog. And so they look at me, even though I have my own business and I have had it for years and I'm doing work that I love and I've traveled to 26 countries and I'm really authentic to myself, they look at me as rogue, right? As an outlier. They look at me as a rebel. Not even a rebel. I don't, rebel feels, because feels too something, but rogue, right? Like I got the memo. I was following it. And then I went left, right? I went my own way. And when you do that, especially in societies and in communities and in cultures that have a lot of strength and power from conforming, conforming and creating this sense of belonging, right? By blending in, not even blending in, but by doing what everybody else is doing. Everybody's going to college, we all going to college. Everybody's getting a graduate degree, we all getting a graduate degrees. Everybody's getting married and buying houses and living in a white picket fence. We all doing that. That's how we kind of toe the line. We're all going to the same church, right? Like we all grew up AME in Seattle, right? Like not all, but almost all the people I grew up with, we all went to the same AME church. We went to the private schools. Like we did all the things together, which again, I understand and appreciate why. But when someone like me is like, this no longer serves me, actually, this isn't what I want anymore. I'm going to follow my own soul's calling. I'm going to listen to my own inner wisdom. I'm going to do what I want to do with my life and live my own dreams, not your dreams for me. Often the community doesn't come with, because the community needs that sense of we're all doing the same thing on this same page in the same way. And so that can be isolating when you don't want to, right? When you want to and are here to live your life according to your unique plan and your community isn't. Now, the first time I left the country was in 1993. I went to France with my 8th grade class. My best friend at the time had gone to Russia in the 5th grade. I had applied for that trip, did not get accepted because we were at the same school, right? Did not get accepted. But a few years later, she and I both went with our French class to France in the 8th grade. And it was amazing, right? And that's when I got the travel bug, because I had been studying French. I love French food, French culture and everything. And I was like, oh, this is what it's like to be out and about in the world. And I didn't realize that how unusual that was to, one, be a Black girl traveling abroad in 1993, and then to keep doing it. I didn't realize how unusual that was. But the more that I did it, the more that I traveled, the more that I was like, I want to go do this and do that, the more it felt like an outlier, which makes sense why so many people don't follow their own inner wisdom or follow their own path. It's because it's, in a lot of ways, externally so much easier to follow what the path is that's laid out before you. Now, don't get me wrong. My mother is a world traveler. She and my father went to Ghana before I was even born, right? My grandmother, who was born in the 20s, was in Asia in the 70s. And and I'm talking about Japan and China, right? Where they, not with the military, because she wanted to go. She and my uncle went for pleasure. So that's the ilk people that I come from. Like, they're world travelers, they're world adventurers, but it needed to fit inside of a package that would be looking good and approved of and validated by external approval. And me, myself, personally, I don't care about external approval. I never have. And I think that's also what makes me such an outlier, because I don't care. A few videos ago, I had on a blonde wig, and someone commented, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she was like, Queen, wear your natural hair. And I'm like, oh, I will do another video completely on hair, but I'm like, I cut my hair off when I was 15, when everybody I knew was on the creamy crack. I was wearing natural hair 15. and then became a cheerleader. Okay, like 15 was wearing afros in the 90s. This is hair is an expression to me. One day I'm gonna have pink hair, purple hair, brown hair, blonde hair, it, short hair, long hair, like braids. It's not a indication of who I am or how I feel about myself. Now, I'm not myself. Now, I'm not saying that's true for everybody, but that's true for me. And so to be, as an example, 15 would going to cut my hair off and just wear it natural. Nobody I knew except my best friend later then also cut her hair off and wore it natural. But nobody else was doing that, right? Like these are things that this is just who I am. I've always followed my own way. And so conventional wisdom teaches us that success comes from following this right timeline, this specific timeline, going to college, getting a good job, getting married, buying a house, joining the right organizations, whether that's sororities or the links or whatever it is, joining the organization so that people know you and you're known by them, having the perfect amount of kids, having the right amount of money, being able to brag so that other people are impressed by you and your accomplishments and how you look on paper. But often that's going to leave you empty because it ain't about you, right? You're doing it for the world, not for your own fulfillment. If this is resonating with you, please subscribe because this is what we're going to be talking about, right? How to live in alignment with what you want, how to live your dreams, how to create the life that you want for yourself. And if that is interesting to you, check out Success Reset in the description below, my one-on-one 3-month private mentorship to help you redefine success for yourself from a place of ease and not effort. Because really, that's what we're here to do. So you can do all those right things, all those things that you have been raised to do or celebrated to do. Like, I went to Spelman, and which is the #1 HBCU, right? And Black women in America are the most educated group demographic in the country. So that means most of my friends and colleagues I'm going to call them colleagues, most of my friends who I went to Spelman with have graduate degrees, are also college professors, are also multi-degreed people. And a lot of my close friends from college are academicians. That's how they say it, right? And college professors. And a lot of them, not all, are miserable. They look chef's kiss amazing on paper. Amazing on paper. Books published, highly sought after speakers, highly paid, well respected, right? Chef's kiss. Enviable careers. And behind closed doors, in our private conversations, some of which have been clients of mine, they are miserable because they followed that trajectory, the one I stepped off of. They continued on that trajectory until they got to where they are, right? Until they got to where they are in their careers now. Now, the thing is about academia and many of these kinds of linear career systems is that there's never really a point of exhale built in, right? I have a lot of friends who are academicians, who have the books, who are on the committees, who are publishing the things, who are now, some of them are now full-time professors, but there's always one more rung to climb. And I'm not saying don't go and follow your natural career path if that's what lights you up and turns you on. But what I'm saying is you must learn how to build in ways of rewarding yourself throughout the process, ways of nourishing yourself throughout the process, because it's dangerous if you are relying on the system, whether that's holidays, vacation, retirement, sabbatical, or the weekend, to be the time that you take care of yourself, and otherwise you're just grinding and pushing and going. Because the system don't care about you. That's why she told me I'm acting like a spoiled child who wasn't getting her way. The system did not care about me, right? It's our responsibility to remember and relearn how to care for ourselves, no matter what the system is doing, because the system does not care about us, particularly in late stage capitalism in the United States. We are just bodies. Now, we could be high paid bodies or low paid bodies, right? But in this system, rest is not built in. And there are plenty of countries and plenty of societies all over the world where rest is built in, where it's a part of the conversation, and not even the conversation, where it's a part of the system. There are countries where paternity leave is 6 months, right? There's systems where healthcare is built in, where you don't work more, you do not work more than 30 or 40 hours a week. Those are systems. That's not the system of the United States of America, which is where I'm from, which is also why I'm moving abroad. I'll put another video here talking about where I'm going and how I chose the country I'm moving to. And so it's often considered, while that's true, right? The system isn't taking care of us. The system doesn't care about us. The system ain't paying attention to our humanity or our well-being. It's simultaneously fed in that it's dangerous to follow an unconventional, unprecedented path. Because if you veer off on your own path, like I have, right? And you fail, all of the hard work and all of the sacrifices of your ancestors and your elders have been wasted, and you're going backwards, and your life will be a waste. Unless you're the next Oprah, right? Unless you're the next, because Oprah didn't finish her Tennessee State University, right, in her undergrad. It was decades before she went back. But then she became Oprah. So it's like, well, that's okay, right? Unless you become such a standout that we can wash away, but she still went back and she still finished, right? Going after your dreams is considered frivolous. And most people who are not living their dreams, and even when they are, it's been so deeply conditioned that it will lead to inevitable failure. And so that's why we want to do it on the side, right? Like that's why we want to do it as a hobby. That's why we don't want to put our eggs in that basket, because we're afraid that if we don't follow this tried and true path, which has required its own degrees of internal sacrifice for external rewards, if we don't follow our own tried and true path that someone else gave us, then following our own path will lead to inevitable failure. And so we're told that we honor our lineage and our legacy and create a worthwhile path by continuing to follow along in the line that's already been created for us. It doesn't actually matter what you want for yourself. So even though I eventually went back to Spelman, I graduated, I finished 8 years after my incoming class, because I would come back and I would leave and I would come back and I would leave, but I did finally graduate, and I have not gone on to grad school. I have no desire right now, right? Maybe for fun later in my life, but not right now. But even the way that my mom would talk about it, right? Even though I had done all these remarkable things that no one else I knew had done. I had trekked in the Himalayas and hired a porter and a guide and trekked to Annapurna Base Camp for 3 weeks in the Nepalese Himalayas. Prem was my guide, survived an avalanche. Then from there, I went to India by myself, up and down the country, small villages, and stayed with families and lived in a coconut hut on the beach and was in temples and all this by myself at 20 years old. I turned 21 in Goa, India. All of this because I was curious and still am innately curious about the world. I did what I set out to do when I said, I want to be in the world exploring it. I don't want to be studying it in this book. I learned about it enough to know where I wanted to go. I did what I set out to do. And the way my mother would talk about it was that I dropped out of college, right? That was the narrative. Oh, she's dropped out of college. You dropped out of college. Now, I get that that was her conditioning. That was her understanding. that's not the point. The point is the messaging that I received was that my dreams, my vision, what I wanted for myself was less important than the norm. My hand is disappearing, right? Than the norm, than the expectation, than the path, than the road that was paved ahead of me. And again, I understand and deeply, profoundly appreciate everything that was done, created, sacrificed for me and all of my lineage. And for me, one of the greatest takeaways of all the sacrifices and the work that they did was that I got to choose, right? I got to choose what would light me up. I got to choose what would feel good to me, what was true for me. And so even though I think my mother had to wrestle with her own issues around that, and eventually, because that became something that she could brag about, right? Then she could talk about it differently. But she still, for years, decades, said that I dropped out of college, even though literally it was a leave of absence because I had to submit the paperwork. But simultaneously, my grandmother would actually genuinely brag about it, right? My grandmother would be so proud of me, saying that I had traveled and had done all these things. And my grandma, I remember she had had a stroke and we were at her rehab center. And she was introducing me to staff at the center and people that she had met. My grandma was blind. She'd been blind since she was 65. So she couldn't necessarily see who she was talking to, but she was talking to me, talking about me to the people at the center. And she was like, yeah, my granddaughter has traveled all over the world. She's been to India and she's been to here and she's been there. And they thought she was delusional. They thought she was making things up because they didn't know nobody. And they're like, what the little black girl doing, in India and Thailand and China and Hong Kong and Togo and Ghana and all this stuff. And so I appreciate my grandma for holding it down, right? But all the people I grew up with, all my peers, all my friends, everyone thought that I was so strange for doing my own thing, for not kind of falling in line. And I think most people want to avoid that kind of alienation. Most people want to avoid feeling like an outsider. And so they don't even pay attention to what their inner calling is, so much so because in a lot of ways, it's easier to follow the line that's been laid out. And that is what leads to misery. True fulfillment comes from listening to, trusting, and creating your own path, not someone else's. And maybe sometimes that path will have overlap with other things, right? Like I eventually, like I said, went back to Spelman, got my degree. And what I majored in, which was comparative women's studies, I love my major. I love my department. I love my classes. I love that I got to study Black women, everything, art, literature, history, science, everything through the lens of Black womanhood because I was a comparative women's studies major at Spelman College, right? That lit me up and has informed everything I do now to this day. So there can be overlaps, but the power, the gift, the true fulfillment comes from listening to your own inner wisdom and following your own path. And because we're often terrified of doing that, often terrified of trusting that things can turn out great for us if we do things our own way, we don't. And then we end up 55, 65, miserable, emotionally depressed, mentally stressed, and our body is impacted. Not following your dreams, not trusting yourself, not creating your own path has an impact, especially when you can, right? There are times that I have had to just do what I had to do to make money. It wasn't about following my dreams, right? It was like, how do I eat? But when you can make choices and you don't, right? When you can trust yourself and you don't, when you can center yourself and you don't, that's when it starts to take a real toll on you. And so part of it's about reprogramming, relearning that you have freedoms and options and choices that your elders and ancestors did not have. And you can take advantage of them. We can take advantage of them. It's time to start trusting yourself. And it can be inch by inch, right? It can be little by little, but it doesn't have to be a whole complete life overhaul. But you deserve a life that feels good to you. You deserve a life that feels as good as it looks, because who cares if everyone's impressed? Who cares if everyone thinks you're great and you're secretly wishing that you had another life, feeling like you are living on the wrong timeline, but everyone else is impressed? I'm not, I am not easily impressed, first of all. I'm not easily impressed, but also I'm inspired by people who are going and choosing their own path and living their own way, because you deserve the life that you want on your terms, in your way. You're here to expand possibilities, not just recreate the path that's already gone before you. So I have an exercise that if you've made it this far in the video, thank you for being here. I'm very glad you're here. I have an exercise for you to reflect on and identify where in your life you're living by someone else's rules. So let's just call it, whose rule is this? Sounds like a game show. Whose rule is this? Okay, so I want you to grab a journal. You can pause here and come back and visit this video at any time. But so I'm going to lay it out for you now. I want you to grab a journal and write down a specific area of your life that feels stuck, feels not like it's moving, not like it's or authentic to you. So that could be your job, your relationships, how you spend your weekends, what you are doing during the day, however, right? As soon as I said an area of your life that feels stuck, you knew. And if it feels like your whole life feels stuck, just choose one piece of it, just one piece that you want to focus on for this practice. And I want you to ask yourself these questions. Question number 1, what rules am I following in this area? Write down any expectations, beliefs, or shoulds that come to mind. And they may be buried so deep that it may take a little while to get there. So another angle to approach this question from can be, if I don't do this, this will happen. If I don't do this, this will happen. Because that's a rule, right? That's a belief. So it could be, I should be able to work overtime. I have to work overtime to show people that I'm valuable. I need to host this next family dinner event, because it's my turn, or everyone expects this of me, or I've got to go do this thing because that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay. Next question. Where did these rules come from? Now, these may be things that are explicit and direct. Like I said, my mom said to me, we don't do that in this family. That's real direct. Okay. That's real explicit. We don't do that in this family. But it could be something that is not as explicit, that's just understood, right? It's just, culture is defined by the kind of like layman's terms of ways saying culture is like, that's the way we do things around here. That's just how it is, or that's how it's always been, right? So if it's like, that's just how it's always been, I want you to peel back the layer, go a little bit deeper, and reflect on whether these beliefs are truly your own, or if they've been inherited from your family, your culture, your society, or someone else's expectations. Just, and we're not doing this with any judgment. We just have to take stock to know what we're actually dealing with, right? When my mom said, we don't do this in this family, and I was like, right, I was not happy, but she wasn't wrong. So I went right back. And it's taken this, what I've shared with you today is like me walking it back, right? Walking it back. Because at the time I didn't have the context. I knew my grandmother and grandparents, I knew all the degrees and all the stuff, but I didn't know the context and I didn't know what's the word I want? I'm getting teary thinking about it. I didn't know the context, but I also didn't know I don't know. It was a deliberate choice, right? Because it was my norm that everybody I grew up with was on the college track. Their parents had gone to college, back multiple generations. It didn't occur to me that the choice my great grandfather made, the choice to put education first, was deliberate, because everybody didn't choose that, right? Everybody didn't go that way. He made a deliberate choice and set the path for his lineage. It was a choice. And so that expectation, that priority, that value was passed down to my grandmother and her brother, who's the one who went to Morehouse, right? Who was passed down to their kids. It was my mom with her bachelor's and 2 master's degrees, right? And my uncle and his master's degree, right? The only family member that I knew who did not go to college, who was in my mom's age mate group, was my uncle, who was developmentally delayed. Like, he just didn't have the intellectual capacity to go to college. So he was the only one I know out of all the cousins of my mom who didn't go to college. Everybody went to college. Everybody that got a degree. So then that was passed down to me, right? Because this is how we get out. My mother, my grandmother were raised in a rural village in Texas that has, to this date, never had more than 1,400 people. To date. And they have all gone on to do amazing things in the world. Amazing, amazing things. Largely in part due to choosing this particular path, right? There's a method to the madness. That's why I call myself rogue bougie, because I'm bougie, but rogue because I'm gonna do it my own way, right? And so everything has its place. So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we need to know where it came from. When I could peel back the layers and get back to, my great grandfather was born 2 years after enslavement ended, 2 years, and went all the way to Cornell University and got a master's degree, a second master's degree. I'm like, okay, I can understand why. That doesn't mean I have to do it, but I respect it, right? And I appreciate it, because everything that was done before me allows me to be at choice, allows me to be rogue, gives me that freedom and flexibility. So next question is, how do I actually feel about these rules? How do I actually feel about these rules? And I want you to give yourself permission to be honest and answer how you actually feel about these rules. When my mom said to me, we don't do that in this family, I felt disappointed. I felt unseen. I felt obligated, right? And so I went back, because I was like, well, that's what I'm doing. I was still very much in this, like, I'm a good daughter, I'm just doing what I'm expected trope, which we can talk about another day, because I don't feel like that no more, okay? And so you have to ask yourself and be honest. How do I feel about these rules? Are they serving me? Or do they feel restrictive and misaligned with my values? Be honest. Tell the truth. And as you are going through this journaling, I want you to spot the mismatch and circle one rule. Just start with one. Circle one rule that feels the most disconnected from your true dreams and your true values. This is where you're living by someone else's rules, regardless of the context, regardless of the why, regardless of the payoff. This is where you're living by someone else's rules. And this is when it's time to start visualizing your own rules and to trust that following your own rules can also bring you the success that you desire. That's important. So I want you to then rewrite that one rule into a new rule that reflects your dreams, your values, your goals. For example, an old rule could be, I should stay at this job because it's stable. How many times have we said that? I only have to retire in this many years. I should stay at this job because it's stable. A new rule could be, try this on for size, or please create your own. I deserve work that aligns with my passions and lets me thrive. That's true. That's true, my friend. Right? You deserve work that aligns with your passions, with your joys, with your strengths, with your gifts, not just things that you have been told that you're good at, but things that actually feel good to you. And this is how you start getting out of the self-sacrifice and the suffering and the just swallowing it. We know how that ends. Usually not well. This is why many of us are stressed and not well, right? But you have to give yourself new rules and a permission slip along with that. Because if you continue following someone else's life rules instead of creating your own, you will feel miserable, depressed, and unfulfilled. You will. Especially when you know what you want and you're swallowing it and not giving yourself permission to do it. You'll keep looking for meaning and significance and value outside of yourself, whether from degrees, relationships, careers, whatever else looks good on paper, right? You're going to have your own specific algorithm that you've been told looks good on paper. But no matter how good it looks from the outside, inside, you'll be achingly unfulfilled, sad, despondent, disconnected. And you deserve better. Ooh, excuse me. You deserve better. You do. And you can have it. So now that we've gone through this process, now that you've identified where you're following someone else's rules, you may be wanting to explore how to create new ones with real depth, with real connection that actually feel true and good and aligned to you. And that is great news because I have an offering that's a 45-minute one-on-one call called Inside Hour. It sounds like I'm saying inside, which I guess could work too, but it's called Insight Hour, where we'll map out the tangible steps to realign with this part of your life. Oh, no, it's not called Inside Hour. It used to be called Inside Hour. Now it's called Alignment Hour. Inside Hour was an Ask Me Anything call where you could ask me anything. There was no specific agenda. But with Alignment Hour, there is a specific agenda, which is mapping out what actually realigns you with what you want with your life. Creating new rules, looking at where you're out of alignment, where you're disconnected, where you're living someone else's program, and reconnect you with your own truth, your own path, your own life. So down below, Alignment Hour is the link. I would love for you to join me. It's you and me, one-on-one, 45 minutes. We dive deep into it. And you walk away with a clear roadmap about how to create life according to your own rules. But first, we have to uncover where you're not. And that's what we do in Alignment Hour. We get you back in alignment with yourself. So thank you for being here. Very glad you're here. Let me know if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Let me know below what resonated most with you. I would love to hear your stories about living out of alignment, following someone else's rules, how that's time to change, And if you're up for it, what your dreams are. What do you actually want with your life? What do you actually want to be doing? How do you actually want to be living? I'm honored that you're here, very excited to support you. And in the meantime, check out this video where I talk about, oh, my hand keeps disappearing. Check out this video where I talk about getting ready to move abroad again and the steps that I'm taking to live my dream of relocating abroad. Thanks again for being here. Have a beautiful day.